We are live.
The giant Ferris wheel, the bright lights of the night, all of these things together can only mean one thing: the Formula One world is back in Singapore at last. Now, obviously, the fact that Formula One is back in Singapore in 2022 is in itself testament to just how far the world has moved on from, in some ways, the COVID-19 pandemic, even though we are still, of course, living in the pandemic. Now, you remember that the last race in Singapore, which Formula One held, happened all the way back in 2019, when the world, indeed not just the world of Formula One, but the world in general, was a very, very different place. However, good news for fans who love the Marina Bay Circuit. The race is back this time around and there seems to be no stopping it whatsoever. So we are going to witness a wonderful race, hopefully at least, under the bright lights and under the night skies. Now, of course, with Formula One heading back to Singapore, there would be a few interesting questions that most people would be having on their minds, and we've picked out what we think would be the 5 more key questions ahead of this race, and we are, of course, going to address them one by one. The first question is, of course, pertaining to a certain Max Verstappen, and you note for a fact that Verstappen at this point it's just a matter of when he clinches the World Drivers' Championship and not if. He could in fact clinch the World Drivers' Championship with a win in Singapore, but he would need a few things to go his way. Not only would he have to win and also get the fastest lap, he would also have to hope that Charles Leclerc finishes 9th or lower. If that happens, then mathematically the title is over. Verstappen has sealed it for the second year on the trot. Obviously, the Red Bull driver has in fact played down the prospect of winning the title in Singapore, saying it's not on his mind. But who's he kidding? Of course it's going to be on his mind. Of course he's going to want to win that title, and this time around in far easier circumstances than he managed to do so in 2021. Remember, in 2021 it didn't just go down to the last race, it went down to the last lap of the last race. This time around, however, F1 has more than a few races still left. Don't forget, we'll be heading to Japan, then of course America, Brazil, Mexico and Abu Dhabi after this. So he has plenty of time and he's going to seal the title with more than a few races left, whether or not he does it in Singapore. But it's hard to argue against the fact that on this particular circuit, you would think that the Red Bulls, especially Max Verstappen, considering just how much he can extract out of this car, will be favorites. It seems likely that he will win, but again, you never really know how Formula One works. It can be a weird and wonderful sport sometimes. Which brings us, of course, to the next question. Can this man, Charles Leclerc, manage to get back on top again? Now, when I say on top, I don't mean of the World Drivers' Championship standings. That boat has all but sailed. It really is no longer a case of Ferrari fighting for the title, and really it's a case of ending the season strongly and ensuring that they're in a good position to fight for the title again come 2023. But if they have to end the season well, they will need to get at least a couple of victories under their belt. What is happening right now with Ferrari is twofold. Not only are they all but out of the Drivers' Championship, but there's a very real chance they could miss out on second spot in the World Constructors' Championship. Now, the Constructors' Championship is important because that is in fact how the prize money from Formula One is distributed. So the higher you finish, the more prize money you get, the better your budget can be. So in that sense, Ferrari, having already lost out on the World Drivers' Championship, or all but lost out, will be keen to at least ensure they stay ahead of a resurgent Mercedes in second place, and hope that they don't end up slipping up there too, because otherwise, regardless of the fact that they have the fastest car, or in fact one of the fastest cars on the grid, it would be an embarrassment for them. In that sense, it is important for them to get back on top again. Whether or not that happens in Singapore, that's something that we can only, we'll have to wait and watch. And speaking of Mercedes, which Mercedes is going to turn up in Singapore? Now, obviously, that's been the real problem of Mercedes this year with the W13. It's an absolute diva of a car, and in fact has more often than not blown hot and cold on different track circuits, depending on, of course, the configurations that you would need. So you'd remember that once the summer break was ended, Mercedes looked very ordinary in Belgium, but just a week later in Netherlands and Zandvoort, they looked like they could actually compete for a victory. That's the thing with the Mercedes. Their car right now is far better suited to, of course, the high downforce tracks. And Singapore, with the number of turns it has and the fact that, of course, it is a tighter circuit due to it being a street circuit, is a high downforce track. So Mercedes are at least expecting that they can be competitive here. However, there is one small road bump. No, I mean that literally, because the circuit in Singapore, the road is pretty bumpy. So the thing with a high downforce track is that You want to run the car as low to the ground as possible, but if the circuit is bumpy, that will cause problems, it will cause oscillations, and it will cause the drivers discomfort. So at this point, it's not really sure which Mercedes will show up. You could in fact be seeing the continuation of the trend wherein they look strong and where they look average in qualifying, but they look much stronger on the race days. Either way, Lewis Hamilton is in fact coming very close to getting an unwanted record. He's now gotten a win so far this year, and if he ends the season without a win, it'll actually be his first ever season in Formula 1 where he hasn't got at least one win. That is a bonkers record when you think about it, especially considering he's been competing since 2007. But that reality looks closer to happening. For Mercedes' sake and Hamilton's sake, most people would be hoping that that doesn't in fact happen. And speaking, of course, there's plenty more talking points if you look at, the battle for 4th place. And obviously, right now, it is Alpine who seem to be in the best position to actually grab that 4th place. It'll be their best finish for a few years because for the last few seasons, they had been content finishing just 5th in the championship, at least the Constructors' Championship. This time around, they look close to finishing 4th. The real question is, can they extend their advantage? And the easy money would be on saying yes, because the Alpines do have a car that for the most part has looked very good and has gotten better every single time the team has gotten developments. There haven't been problems they've run into, and they are generally suited to most circuits. In that sense, it is safe to say that Alpine would look better, especially considering the struggles. If we're talking about Mercedes blowing hot and cold, that McLaren, who are of course Alpine's closest rivals in that battle for 4th place, have themselves been having a lot of issues when it comes to blowing hot and cold on circuits. And I again mean that quite literally, because their major problems come from the overheating of brakes. So if that crops up again, or if they find that their car in fact isn't quite as fast around the streets of Singapore as expected, you can expect it to be another long slog for McLaren, but Alpine won't be complaining too much. And last but not the least, can we expect anything close to a fitting farewell for the Lion of Singapore? That is, of course, Sebastian Vettel. Now, you note for a fact that Vettel has the most number of race wins at Singapore. He's won there 5 times, and in fact, the last time that F1 raced in Singapore, he had won the race. It was the 2019 race, and it feels like a whole different world now because, of course, it was. Remember, that was the year when Vettel had Charles Leclerc as his teammate, and that was Leclerc's first season. It was a battle between the 2 Ferraris for the win, and Vettel, rather controversially, had actually not given up the lead despite promising to do so early on. He took the win. It was a pretty contentious win, and it actually turned out to be one of his last wins in Formula 1. He's not going to bow out ideally actually in a fitting farewell, because if there was any justice, you'd think that a fitting farewell would mean that Seb would get his 6th win and possibly his final win in Formula 1. That doesn't seem likely to happen because the Aston Martin is on average the 7th or 8th fastest car on the grid, but we can hope for a nice run through the grid and maybe a points finish. Would certainly be a nice way to close out what has been a pretty good time for Vettel in the streets of Singapore. And that's our particular 5 questions that we are focused on, what we think will be the major talking points or things to watch out for ahead of the Singapore Grand Prix. But enough about me and us. What do you guys think? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and of course subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Then you can tap the bell icon so that you know every single time we're going live or uploading a new video for you guys. Then don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram as well. And last but not least, download the Sports app. Thank you once again for joining us. As always, I've been Shane Dias, and I hope to see you through the day. But for now, goodbye.